Amateur Traveler, episode 852. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about lakeside beaches and parks, immigrant neighborhoods, a film festival, and a tall tower, as we go to Toronto, Canada. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Toronto. I would like to welcome to the show Erin Hynes from pinatravel.org and Alpaca My Bags podcast. We will talk more about that later. Erin is coming to us from Toronto, Canada, and come to talk to us about Toronto, Canada. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Always fun having another fellow travel podcaster. I don't know if that's the right term, but
I would say fellow, yeah.
Okay,
community.
All right. Excellent. And your connection with Toronto?
My connection with Toronto. I'll make the long story short. I grew up in Ottawa, Ontario, the capital of Canada, and left when I was about 18. I moved to Montreal. I lived there for 5 or 6 years. And then I moved to Toronto 9 years ago. And after living in those 3 big Canadian cities, I have decided that Toronto is my favorite and I would like to live here for the rest of my life. I absolutely love this city.
Excellent. And I can tell right away that I am not from there because I think both T's should be pronounced. And people from there assume that there's just the one at the beginning. So
it's the classic tell.
Yes, I hope you will forbear with me. But
I'll say right off the top, the biggest tip for anyone coming to Toronto who's not from Toronto, you will get in people's good books if you say it the way I'm saying it. So just forget about the T's.
Excellent. And why should someone go to Toronto?
I always tell people to come to Toronto because the city truly has something for everyone. The city has amazing museums, shopping, incredible food, nightlife, and it's also just surprisingly green. If you like the outdoors, there's a lot you can get up to in the city, from kayaking to hanging out in parks. And what I personally love about the city, and I think what's kept me here so long, is how diverse it is. Every neighborhood is unique, and I really just love wandering the various neighborhoods and seeing what I could find. So yeah, it's just such a vibrant city, and really you'll find whatever it is you're looking for here.
Excellent. And what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
So I would recommend 4 days in Toronto. It's a big city. There's a lot to see. And then 3 days exploring outside of Toronto. So if you're going to make the trip, if you're going to fly here especially, I would say you want to come for a week, spend the good chunk of that week in the city, and then take some time going outside the city and seeing a bit more of the province of Ontario. So that could be small towns or parks. I often tell people to go up to Petroglyph Provincial Park or to Algonquin Park, and then you get the experience of the big city mixed with Ontario nature.
Excellent. We'll get into more of that later. Where are we going to start in the city?
Ooh, okay. So I was thinking about how to go around this, and I think the easiest way to approach a trip to Toronto is to think about it in different categories. And the categories I was thinking of are the main sites, the things that every visitor wants to see. Museums, there's also sports, entertainment, green spaces, and neighborhoods. So off the top, I would say there are main sites that you should at least look into and see if they interest you, because these are the main things that people come for. So most people know the CN Tower. It held the record of the tallest freestanding structure on land for over 30 years, so it's extremely tall. It is a bit of a tourist trap. It costs a lot of money to go up this tower, but I will say
it does.
It's worth it. I'm a Torontonian, and I think it's worth it. I would say go at sunset, though, so you get to see the sun go down over the city. I think that's the best time. Yonge and Dundas Square has become a really popular spot to check out. I know lots of tourists love going to see that area. It's like the Times Square of Toronto. It's nice to go at night because it lights up. There's also Old City Hall, which is where you're going to find the iconic Toronto sign, which a lot of people like to go and take their picture with.
And I'm going to slow you down just a bit here, just in terms of pacing. With the CN Tower, for instance, we're going to go at sunset. We're just going to go up quickly, take some pictures, and go down, or is there more to it that we should tell people about?
Ooh, the CN Tower, you can really make that as long a visit as you like. I think I spent maybe like 30, 40 minutes up there taking photos. But really, once you're up there, like that's all there is to do. You're on a viewing platform. It's completely circular, so you can walk around. So I'm sure there are people that spend like hours up there. There's no time limit on how long you can be there, at least from the last time I went. But you can also make it a quick visit. It's really whatever strikes your fancy. There's also a restaurant at the top, and I believe a Toronto hack is to book dinner at the restaurant, and then your trip up the tower is free. So if you want to go and enjoy a dinner with a view, that's actually a really good hack, because then you're getting dinner as well as a free trip up the CN Tower. So it's worth considering that. I think it's an expensive restaurant, but
I would think
it's good from what I hear.
And then you mentioned, and I'm going to try and pronounce it, Yonge and Dundas Square?
Yes.
Times Square is easier to say. I will just say. So we're going there, we're seeing the big signs, but what else are we doing while we're down there?
I would say it's the place for people watching. So you can just wander around. There's often street performers, so you can watch some break dancing or some other kind of performance. Right there is also Eaton Centre. It spills out onto the square. Eaton Centre is a very famous mall in Toronto. So if you're wanting to shop, you can pop in there. Nearby the square are other really important sites like Mirvish Theatre, for example. So I would say the square is something you add as a stop just to walk around, have a look on your way to somewhere else. So I would factor it into your itinerary based on just proximity to like a larger activity that you're planning for your trip.
Okay. And then I think you were taking us to City Hall next before I interrupted.
So then there's also City Hall. This is a really popular site in the city. It's one of the older buildings in the city. And right next to the hall is an old square. And that's where you'll find the iconic Toronto sign.
Got it.
So good for your Instagram photos.
And then after we do City Hall, while we're in the neighborhood, we should also do what?
That area is close to a lot of different things you can do. See, this is like the thing I always tell people about Toronto. It's best to go through a list of everything possible that you could see, whittle down to the things that you know you want to do, because you'll never be able to do it all, and then build your itinerary based on the things that you've chosen, just because there's just such an overwhelming amount of stuff to do. So I would say from there, your close proximity to the Eaton Centre, a lot of people have this on their list, so you can pop in there if you haven't done it while you were at Yonge and Dundas Square. You're also in a good position from there to head to Chinatown and Kensington Market. You can walk west towards those neighborhoods.
I did a lovely food tour in Chinatown last time I was in, I guess the only time I was in Toronto.
Yeah.
What would you recommend we do while we're in Chinatown?
Oh, eat. You have to eat. That's the best thing to do. A lot of Chinese restaurants, of course, but there's also Vietnamese restaurants. But I would say one of the most famous local spots is called Roll San. And this is a place that people like to go, especially for dim sum. But you can go at any time of day. They'll have a la carte meals available as well.
And we haven't always talked about dim sum, or we've mentioned it a few times in the show, but when we talk about dim sum, we're talking a particular style of Chinese food. I want to say that it's Cantonese in origin, but I could be wrong about that.
I think so, but I would have to double check.
But it's basically the one with the trolleys. We're there and people wheel up trolleys to us and we say, yes, I'll have one of those. And it's got 3 things on it. And maybe it's a bun, or maybe it's I remember my first bad experience with dim sum was it was tripe when I thought it was something else. But I was there without anyone who knew what was going on.
Yeah.
I had better experiences going to dim sum with Chinese coworkers. But
yeah, that's always your best bet.
And do you have one dish that you always make sure you get when you're in Roll San?
I have to admit that I don't eat there because I have very severe food allergies.
Oh, no.
But I go there with my partner who loves Chinese food. This is an issue in our relationship, clearly, because he loves Chinese food and I can't eat it. But I'm a good sport, so I go and I sit with him as he enjoys it. So I'd have to call him in here to ask him.
Okay, fair enough. We won't make you eat with food allergies just so you can talk about it on the podcast. And then we're in Chinatown. We've gone to dim sum. What else are we doing?
Okay, you have to go to Kensington Market. This is a very iconic neighborhood in Toronto. I would say it's most known for vintage shopping, good food, and just like a very lively, vibrant feel is
It'd be
Sundays.
fair to say street art.
Street art, yes, absolutely.
What is very memorable for me about Kensington Market, it was a colorful and picturesque neighborhood in addition to all the old shops and such.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really like nice community of people that live in Kensington Market. And what I really love about them is everyone is very dedicated towards protecting that sort of artistic feel of the neighborhood. So over the years, there's been like lots of protest over taking down old buildings. And yeah, there's just a real commitment to preservation of that neighborhood, which is really nice. And so it definitely has a very unique feel compared to other parts of Toronto.
Favorite little shop in Kensington Market?
Ooh, I'm trying to think.
Shop, cafe, restaurant, whatever.
Yeah. One of my favorite spots in the market to eat is Powwow Cafe. They serve tacos in Ojibwe style. So it's an indigenous restaurant. So it's a great place to taste some local indigenous food and just have amazing tacos. And they have a patio, so it's a nice spot in the summer too.
Okay. And the name that I didn't recognize there in the style is a local First Nations community?
Yes, Ojibwe.
Thank you. Okay. I was implying it from the context, but...
Yeah.
Cool. Where to next?
Okay, so from Kensington Market, I would say you're in a good position to head over to Little Italy. Little Italy, I wouldn't say is like a very popular tourist destination, which upsets me because it's one of the best neighborhoods in the city. It is, as described, where you'll find lots of Italian restaurants. And it's just a very fun neighborhood for shopping, for eating. There's lots of parks around, and it's just lovely to walk through and see what you find. And then from there, you'll want to head north up to Bloor Street, and then that's where you'll find Koreatown.
You mentioned a lot of different ethnic neighborhoods, and this is going to continue in this. I recall hearing a stat, and I don't know if it's correct or still correct, that the majority of people who live in Toronto weren't born in Canada.
Yes, that is very true.
I find a lot of different enclaves in Toronto.
Yeah. Even in surveying my own friends here, basically like over half of people that I'm friends with speak multiple languages and came from another country. I think it is one of the most diverse cities in North America.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, a popular stat is that 200 different languages are spoken in Toronto. It's a lot.
Wow, okay.
It's part of what I love about this city too, because especially like if you're looking for great food, like in Toronto, you're just going to find so many different kinds of food that makes the city so unique.
That's why I wanted to make sure that people understood why we have all of these different things and why they're so significant to the city.
Yeah.
And so I interrupted. You went from Little Italy and you went north to...
Koreatown.
Koreatown, thank you. Okay. And in all of these places, the answer to my question is going to be, what should we do? And you're going to say eat.
Yes.
Are there particular places you would eat in Little Italy or in Koreatown?
So in Little Italy, I would say the most famous place to go is called Diplomatico. It's one of the oldest Italian restaurants in the city.
Okay.
So that's Cafe Diplomatico.
And in Koreatown?
And in Koreatown, oh, you got to go for ramen, I would say. Ishin ramen.
Okay. I don't think of ramen with Korean, but okay.
Yeah, so this is actually another interesting thing to bring up because people do ask me this about Toronto because a lot of the neighborhoods are named after different like ethnic groups and different cultures, but
then
nowadays
they change over time.
They've evolved. So it's like in Chinatown, there's tons of Vietnamese restaurants, and in Little Italy, there's tons of Portuguese restaurants.
Sure.
Everything is like bleeding into each other, but those old names still remain. And you do see like evidence of this older history in each of these neighborhoods. But I would say these days, like those sort of like divisions between cultural neighborhoods are starting to blend entirely.
I remember when I did the food tour and we went to several of the different ethnic neighborhoods. We went to Little Italy and Chinatown. We also then, when we were, I think it was Chinatown, 40 years ago was a Jewish neighborhood, and all of these things had changed over time. And then the different ethnic groups had prospered and then moved to the suburbs, and then a new group would come in. And that's just very typical in all sorts of places.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. We've got our ramen. Now, where are we off to next?
So now I think it's time to go to a museum. And you're in the perfect position to do this because you can hop on the subway, which we call the TTC, and take it east to the neighborhood Yorkville.
Okay.
So once you get to Yorkville, you have 2 museums to choose from. I would say do both if you have time. But if not, choose whichever one is most interesting to you. The more famous one is the Royal Ontario Museum, which Torontonians call the ROM. And this is a natural history museum mixed with world history. So there you're going to find dinosaur bones and Egyptian history. It's just such a big museum. You'll find something that interests you for sure. And they always have special exhibits on as well, which tend to be my favorite thing to go and see because the special exhibits are always super interesting.
Okay.
And then just a short walk from there is the Bata Shoe Museum, which I think is a very unique museum. It's a museum dedicated to the history of shoes, which sounds uninteresting, but when you go, you're like, wow.
Okay.
I never thought so much about footwear. So I've been there twice. I really enjoy it. It's a great museum and it has an interesting history. As you can guess, it's connected to the Bata family, which donated a collection.
And did they make shoes or they just really liked shoes?
I can't remember the details of the story. You learn it when you go to the museum. I think they just collected and liked shoes.
Huh. Okay. So are all the shoes in one size because it was Mr. or Mrs. Bata that was the collector, or?
I'm actually not sure.
Okay. These are the questions people are dying to know. And where are we going? You have me flummoxed at Shoe Museum. I love it.
You got to do it next time you're in Toronto.
I feel there's a pun there that we are leaving on the table. And for someone whose podcast is Alpaca My Bags, I feel that you or I should be able to find it. But
I know.
As we move on, where are we going next?
Okay, so from there, you're in a good position to actually go a bit north in the city to Toronto's only castle.
We're still at the Bata Shoe Museum. We're still in the major downtown, the soul of the city, as it were.
Yes, exactly. So you'll want to head north. It's not too far. You can take public transport or you can grab an Uber, which is really easy. Most Torontonians rely on Uber and taxis to get around. So you'll go up to Casa Loma, which is Toronto's only castle.
Okay. And why does Toronto have a castle?
You'll need to go to find out. But the cliff notes are that it's not really a castle. It's more like a mansion that was built by a very wealthy Torontonian, and the castle was later donated to the public. So there are a couple things you can do there. They hold like different events. For example, they'll do concerts in the gardens. They also have escape rooms inside the castle, which I hear are really fun. There's live actors involved.
Okay.
But you can also tour the castle, which is really interesting because you'll learn the history of the time period of the castle itself and the history of like how it was built and how it ended up in the hands of the city.
Okay, and I'm guessing it's 1800s is when this was built.
Ooh, don't quote me on this. I'm not sure. I think it's probably later 1800s, early 1900s, because that's when Toronto was really starting to sprout up as a city. Okay.
In 1911, you are completely correct.
Yeah.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds? Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
Yeah, so then a short walk from Casa Loma is the Spadina House. That's Spadina.
Okay.
And this is actually a little known spot. I always tell people that if they want to see something that a lot of tourists miss, that they should head here. It's another historic mansion in Toronto, but I would say I actually like it more than Casa Loma. And that's because it's been very well preserved. And the history of this house is really interesting. The other perk to this place is that it's totally free to visit, which I think is really nice. That's super rare in Canadian cities to have like free entry to anywhere. The people that run this place are just like extremely knowledgeable, extremely friendly. They do a personalized tour for everyone who comes. And it's an amazing way to learn about the history of Toronto. So the house has been converted into a museum that shows what affluent life in Toronto was like in the early 20th century, so around the same time period as Casa Loma. And it's just a really great window into some of Toronto's history. And the house itself is just so fascinating. You get to see it as it was back in the day.
Okay. Where to next?
Okay, so from there, you're going to head back down into the core of the city. The entertainment district is a really popular area for tourists because there's so much going on. That's where you can go and see a comedy show or see a film at TIFF or another kind of live show like a Broadway style show. So that's a really popular area to check out. And if you want to see a show, definitely do your research in advance to see what's on and grab your tickets ahead of time.
And seeing a film at TIFF, you're talking about the Toronto International Film Festival.
Little known fact, you can see a film at TIFF anytime. The festival runs every year the first 2 weeks of September. It's a fantastic time to be in the city. If you're a filmie, come and see films. It's really easy to get tickets. But there is a year-round building. It's on King Street where they show films. They have a little cinematheque, so they show films year-round. And their programming is fantastic. I've never been disappointed going to see a film there. So I definitely recommend doing that.
And you talk about being there for the film festival is a great time to go. When is your favorite time of year to be in Toronto?
Definitely, I would say June through to September, end of September.
Okay.
Yeah, best
you
weather.
You have a bit of winter in the other some of the other months.
Yeah. Winter isn't the worst time to come, especially if you're into winter sports. If you're going to combine it with a trip to go skiing or snowshoeing, I think there's plenty to do in winter. Just you'll be doing a lot of things indoors if you come to Toronto in winter. I think summer, like late spring, summer, early fall are the most magical times in the city because Torontonians just come to life. The city is just alive because it's the Canadian curse, right? We're all inside all of winter. And then when summer rolls around, like everyone is like over the moon to be outdoors and just having fun. So the city just comes alive in a way that it isn't alive in the winter. And I like for people to see that. So I always tell people to come in the good weather months.
And if somebody did like the winter sports, how far is it to go skiing or snowshoeing from Toronto?
You're looking at, depending on what kind of hill you want to go to, anywhere from 2 to 6 hours of driving.
Okay, got it. I thought that region is fairly flat, so cross-country skiing more than downhill, right?
There are downhill ski areas. They're not the best, but if you're willing to drive further, like you can get out to Quebec in a couple hours, and that's where you would hit good skiing.
Okay, excellent. So we're coming sometime in the warmer months. We're seeing a film or a show down in the entertainment district. Anything else we're doing while we're in the entertainment district?
Yeah, it's always worth going down to the harbourfront and walking along the lake. So for those who don't know, Toronto is on Lake Ontario. The city runs just alongside the lake. And the harbourfront area is always alive, especially in the summer, with different festivals and activities going on. So it's just a fun place to walk along, people watch, and then if you're up to it, you can grab the ferry from there to the Toronto Islands, which is one of my absolutely favorite things to do in Toronto in the summer.
And that is not very far to the Toronto Islands either.
No, not at all. I think it's maybe 10 minutes on the ferry.
I have been out there in the summertime. Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we didn't talk about it. Where do you recommend for people who are coming to town who you're not offering your spare room to stay?
Yeah, it's a tough question because Toronto is such a big city, and I think where you stay depends on what you plan to do. The thing I'll tell people over and over again is you not plan coming to the city because there's just so much. If you don't plan, you'll make mistakes. So you want to plan where you stay based on what kind of activities you're going to do. And also base it on what kind of TTC accessibility you want, whether you want to walk everywhere, whether you prefer to drive. But I would say somewhere in the center of the city is always best, or in the West End. So the West End being sort of Spadina, the street Spadina, between Spadina and Ossington, which are two streets that are west in the city. And then the other thing I would say is I think it's always a good idea to make sure you're either on the subway line within walking distance or on a major streetcar route. This way, you're able to take public transport really easily.
Okay.
And I'll shout out one hotel that I really love that I always tell people to stay in. It's the Annex Hotel, which is on Bloor Street. So it's in Koreatown.
Got it. Good to know.
Oh, and actually, another note on this. I would always say to avoid staying in the suburbs. I know some people get tempted to stay out in Etobicoke or North York or Markham because it's a lot cheaper, but what you save in money on your accommodation, you will spend on transport because it's a lot of time transiting in and out of the city. So if you're going to make the trip, it's worth it just to spring to stay as close to downtown as you can.
Okay. That sounds good. Any other neighborhoods you would recommend for us?
Ooh, I've touched on a lot of them. I would say some other neighborhoods worth checking out are the beaches, which are in the East End. And as per their name, there are beaches out there. So if you dare to go into Lake Ontario, you can go for a swim. Just check how safe the water is.
When you say how safe the water is, so it's not a matter of coldness, it's a matter of, is it
toxic?
Toxic. I was trying to find a nicer way of saying that, but I couldn't come up with that. Okay.
But yeah, the beaches and also Cabbagetown, which is the neighborhood right next door, are really cute. There's such cute boutiques out there, really good dining. It's just a nice area to wander around on foot. In the opposite direction, you have Parkdale, which is a neighborhood that's been gentrifying quite a lot in recent years. If you like vintage shopping, they have the best vintage shopping. So if you're after some vintage clothes, definitely head to Parkdale.
As we think about all the different places you could go in Toronto, you are obviously not trying to cover everything you could do. What places did you intentionally skip?
Oh, that's interesting. What places did I intentionally skip? I would say I've intentionally skipped a lot of the downtown core.
Okay.
Because when I think about everything I've talked about so far, a lot of it is West Toronto and more North Toronto. Okay. And I would say I'm skipping the downtown core because it's very tempting to spend a lot of your time there because there are a lot of attractions in that area, but I don't feel that part of the city really captures Toronto life in the way that these other neighborhoods do.
Got it. Okay. Good to know. I was just thinking there were things that I did when I was there, like the distillery district was still fairly new when I was there, or the graffiti alley or things like that. And I didn't know if you weren't mentioning them for time or if you were just like, no.
So I'm going to be honest with you, Torontonians think of the distillery district as a bit of a tourist trap. It is beautiful. If you want to see it, like it is beautiful. It's just not a place that people who live here tend to go. I would say if you're going to go to the distillery district and that's something that's high on your list to see in Toronto, try to plan your trip around December, late November, December, because that's when the Christmas market is on. And that is actually a magical time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else we want to do in the town before we go to some of your out-of-town excursions? Sport, you mentioned, and we haven't talked about that yet, for instance.
Yeah, Toronto's a big sports city. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm the expert on sports, but if you like the NBA and you like basketball, seeing a Raptors game apparently is tons and tons of fun. Just make sure to get your tickets in advance. But through spring, summer, fall, one of the most popular sports to go see is baseball. Torontonians love to go see the Blue Jays. I do it every summer, even though I'm not a sports person, because it's just so much fun. And you can get tickets for that quite cheap. You can get them day of. Make sure you get a hot dog and just enjoy the game.
Sounds good. So anything else we want to do downtown before we start heading further afield?
Yeah, I would love to say to check out Toronto parks. This sounds really like a strange suggestion to some people, but parks in Toronto are just such a vibe. People in Toronto love their parks. They're always busy with people, and there's so many of them. Toronto is actually one of the greenest cities in North America. It was designed to be that way. So we have so many gorgeous parks. I would say my favorite ones are Trinity Bellwoods, Christie Pitts, and High Park. High Park is a good one for anyone who has kids because they have a free zoo that you can visit. And this park is massive. You can walk for hours in High Park. It even has a small lake. And some of the parks in the summer do free movie nights. So Christie Pitts, for example, does the Christie Pitts Film Festival. Every Sunday, there's a film that's played in the park. So you can just bring a blanket and settle into the grass and enjoy a movie with lots of other people.
Good fun. And then are we ready to explore now?
I would say so, yeah.
And where are we going to go?
Okay, so day trips or side trips. I would say the most popular one to do is Niagara Falls. And I think if you have time to do one and you haven't seen the falls, I know a lot of Americans see the falls from the New York side. But if you haven't, I think it's worth doing. Canadians love to argue that the Canadian side is better. I would argue that the Canadian side is better. I don't really think that's much of an argument there. I've had some arguments with people, mostly people from New York.
I've been there in quite a few years, so my information is stale. But when I was there, I would definitely say the Canadian side was better.
Yeah, the views are better.
Park-like.
Yeah. The views are better, I would say, and there's a lot more to do. There's so many activities to choose from. Mm-hmm. And it's only about an hour or an hour and a half to drive from Toronto to Niagara Falls, but they've also introduced a train that goes and a bus that goes. So lots of people make the day trip on public transit because I will warn, parking in Niagara Falls is really annoying and expensive. So if it were me, I wouldn't even bother. I would just take public transport there.
Okay.
And yeah, of course, you're going to go see the falls. That's the main thing you'll want to do. But there's also lots of different activities and experiences that you can do. Behind the falls is really fun. You get to walk behind where the water is coming down, and it gets you really up close and personal with the falls. That's what I did last summer, and I quite enjoyed it. So I think that's a worthy day trip to do. You can even spend a night in Niagara Falls if you feel like it. And then beyond that, I would say, if you're in Toronto, you're really close to nature, like I mentioned before, but you're also close to really beautiful towns. Outside of Toronto, there's many very picturesque towns. Some of the most famous ones are Elora, Paris, and Niagara-on-the-Lake. And all these towns are an hour to an hour and a half drive. And they're just beautiful places to spend a day wandering around, popping into boutiques. A lot of them are close to beautiful nature. And it just gives you a sense of what life outside of the big city is like in Ontario.
You mentioned in terms of nature, when we started, you gave us two different provincial parks. Mm-hmm. One was Petroglyphs, which, I was immediately interested in. Yep. And then Algonquin. So tell me more about Petroglyphs Provincial Park.
Yeah, so Petroglyphs Provincial Park, I believe, is about a 3-hour drive from Toronto. I'll have to double check that. But it has the largest known collection of Indigenous rock carvings in Canada. So it's a sacred site, and it's really interesting because you get to see these old carvings that depict turtles, snakes, birds, humans, and more. And you can go on educational tours there where local Indigenous people will tell you about the history of the petroglyphs. That's a big part of the park, but I also just love it for the nature. You can do really beautiful trails there. And it's a very accessible park in the sense that some of the trails are long, like you can go hike for 4 hours if you want, but you can also do short little 30-minute hikes if you're just wanting to do something more low-key.
Google thinks it's only 2 hours out of town.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I
Once
don't
you
know that I
factor in
trust Google
traffic,
more than you, but
I
yeah.
don't trust Google. I always account for that Toronto traffic.
And then you also mentioned Algonquin Provincial Park.
Yes, so this is a very famous park in Ontario. I believe it is a 4 to 4.5 hour drive from Toronto, so it's a bit more of a jaunt. You'll definitely want to plan to spend a night or two if you go to Algonquin Park. But it's famously known as like the vacation park for Canadians. Back in the day, it had lots of resorts that people would go and spend their summers at. Some of those resorts still exist, so you can book into them if you want. But the park is really famous for its wildlife. So if you're looking to see a moose or a beaver or other famous Canadian creatures, Algonquin is where you're going to see them.
Excellent. Other places near and far from Toronto that you would recommend?
Yeah, you're really close to Kingston, actually. Some people like to travel onward to Kingston. It's a 2-hour train trip from Toronto or 2.5, 3-hour drive. Kingston is a small city that's right on the water. So you can do the Thousand Islands are right there, which we also share with the US. So you can go there to enjoy the city and then also do tours of the Thousand Islands. And then from there, you can actually travel on to Montreal. Montreal isn't too far. I think it's 4 hours by train to Montreal from Toronto. Or you can stop in Kingston on the way.
Excellent. Anything else you want to cover in our Toronto itinerary before we get to some of our wrap-up questions?
Yeah, there's one place I'm going to mention, because this is a place I love to tell people to go. If you like cocktails or mocktails, the best place to go in the city is called Civil Liberties. It is a small, quaint bar that is known for having the best bartenders in the city. And what's amazing about it is that when you go in, they'll chat with you to figure out what you like, and then they'll make you a custom cocktail. And I've never in my life been disappointed. I always have a great time there, and everyone I tell to go there loves it. So if you want to have a good cocktail, head to Civil Liberties.
Excellent. Other nightlife things like that we should know about?
Yeah, I would say my personal favorite place, aside from Civil Liberties, would be Drom Taberna, which is on Queen Street. And it is a Eastern European-inspired bar. They serve food, so you can get really amazing Eastern European food there. But they're also known for their live music. I believe Wednesday to Saturday, they have live music every night. It's often outside on the patio. And it's just always a good time. I'm never disappointed when I go to Drom Taberna.
Got it. As we get to some of our wrap-up questions, you are standing in the prettiest spot in Toronto. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Oh, I'm a sucker for the Toronto skyline. I have to say you're standing on the Toronto Islands, looking back at the city as the sun goes down.
Okay. I'm with you.
Yeah, you hop on the ferry and you take the ferry across as the sun is setting. It's magical. I never get tired of it.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Toronto.
Oh my gosh, so much. Just the people of Toronto are hilarious. And people, especially in the summer, are all out on the streets just having a good time together. So you just see the most ridiculous things out on the streets. And it's always harmless and tons of fun. For example,
ridiculous thing you've seen?
Recently, downtown Toronto, a beaver was found wandering the streets. And I kid you not, a group of 40 people were crowding around trying to catch this beaver, trying everything they could do to save it and get it off the street. And it was just a perfect example of Torontonians coming together to save an animal.
One last question for you. Actually, before my last question, why is it Toronto has only one T and Torontonians has two? But
it's a good question.
That is a rhetorical question. If you had to summarize Toronto in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Diverse, community, and vibrant.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Erin Hynes, and we mentioned PinaTravels.com and Alpaca My Bags podcast. If I wanted to send people to your best post on Pina Travels about Toronto, where am I sending them to?
Oh, I have an itinerary on spending 4 days in Toronto, which includes a day trip. So just search 4 days in Toronto.
Okay. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But then we have to talk about Alpaca My Bags podcast. It is not a podcast about alpacas.
No,
or about
it's
packing.
not.
What is it about?
Yeah, so I host Alpaca My Bags, which is a show dedicated to exploring how we can travel in a way that's better for people and for the planet. And I do that by interviewing thought leaders and experts from around the tourism industry about issues related to responsible travel.
Excellent. If people are interested in that, I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. Erin, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your obvious love for Toronto.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you've gotten something from Amateur Traveler and want to give back or just want to learn more about how to become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/Amateur Traveler. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.